very good afternoon and welcome to this e-symposium on money in politics, coming live to you from the NTV studios here in Kampala. My name is Charles Mwangu Shampagi. I have with me in studio Mr. Henry Muguzi Aliwali. Henry Muguzi he heads the Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring, ACFIM in Uganda. Henry, very nice to have you.
Thank you, Charles, for having me.
And like I've introduced, this is an e-symposium, so we have a large part of our panel joining us virtually from various continents and various parts of this country. I have Dr. Magnus Ohman. Dr. Magnus Ohman is the director for the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, IFES. He heads the regional office in Prague, Czech Republic. Dr. Ohman, do I have you? Okay, we will get him up as soon as we get his link from Prague in Czech Republic. I have from Nigeria, in Anyimba, Kogi State, I have Dr. Patrick Ukase. Dr. Patrick, do I have you? Yes, I can hear you, but the voice is a little bit low. Someone in production needs to ramp that up a little bit. I will be joined. Doctor, do I have you? Welcome to this e-symposium. Could you share with us how's Nigeria, Anyimba State? Dr. Okase? Yes, please unmute your audio, your microphone. Let me proceed with introducing the rest of my panel as we get those clarified in a moment. I'll be joined by veteran politician, many would call him, a former minister, former many things, former President General of the Democratic Party, Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogerere, who will be joining us from his home in Kampala via a live link that will be doing that will be linking up to him. He has written a book that we'll be using as a reference for this e-symposium, Political Party Financing in Uganda, a critical analysis in reference to other countries, which was done in collaboration with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung.
Absolutely.
We'll be joined also by, from Makerere University, Dr. Businje Kabumba, who is a lecturer at the School of Law, Makerere University. He teaches international law. He also teaches constitutional law and has done extensive research on these areas. He'll be joining us in a moment. And of course, we'll have other people joining us via this live broadcast from here at NTV and on social media platforms, which I'll be sharing and will be running on your screen in a moment. Let me start with you, Henry. We are going into an election, but it's not the first election we're having as a country.
Yes.
We've had many elections. And the question of money in politics has been evolving as our electoral democracy has evolved. I'll take you back a little. You have an elections just before and after independence. Then you have a lull that runs, I think, from the 1964 referendum on the lost counties. Then you're going into the 1966 crisis when we should have had our first general election. 1971, you don't have an election. So between 1971 to 1979, you're under military dictatorship, if you want to call it that. Then you have an election in 1980, December 1980, that ends in a civil war that runs for 5 years. You have a new government in 1986, which doesn't organize elections until a little bit later to expand the NRC in 1987. Then you have the first general elections in the real sense in 1996. Though you might want to smuggle in the elections for the Constituent Assembly in 1994. 1993 and 94. So 1996, 2001, 2006, 2011, 2016, and now you're heading into, how has the question of money in politics evolved alongside our struggles for elective democracy?
Thank you, Charles. Good afternoon, viewers, wherever you are watching us from, whether it's live on NTV or YouTube or Zoom or Facebook. You raise and bring in a very interesting perspective, because it's important to interrogate where does money begin to be a factor in influencing electoral behavior in the country. Yeah, if you look and speak with the people that have been here for some time, they will tell you that if you look at the first election we had in 1958, we had political parties, obviously, and these political parties, which have been tagged as weekend political parties, because they used to gather, members used to gather over the weekend in Katwe or Nakulab and so on. They were sustained by funding from members themselves. So you get to see that the foundation is that people who come to subscribe to these political parties as members finance them. The same story would carry on up to 1959, 60 when we get the second multi-party elections. But if you move fast forward to 1980, again you would see that we had a politics that was premised pretty much on ideas, not money. And then, but we start to see money coming into the picture. I think from 1996, because then it becomes clear that if you have some gifts to give to voters, maybe they can you can change their thinking. 2001, when we have the regime in office being challenged by one of their own, Dr. Kizza Besigye, the dynamic changes, the playing field changes, and so we start to see money coming to the picture now. But it was not so pronounced until all hell broke loose in 2011. You would recall that election was followed by citizen protests, walk to work, because the economy was in shambles. Inflation had reached a level where I think for some of us who would go to buy sugar, were buying a kilo at over 10,000. It was too much. And then the question, it later transpired that the reason how we had gotten there is because there had been too much money in circulation, pumped into circulation during election time, that chased too few goods, and so
run inflation through the roof.
And so I think from 2006, I think we get to see domination of money, but it's been evolving, like you said. 2015, 16, evolving. It has reached now a level where it has actually become a problem.
Okay. You at Taksim put together this e-symposium. Why now?
So why are we doing it now? One of the democracy in Uganda, you would say easily that it is experiencing reversal movement. And one of the reasons it is in a reversal is because our electoral politics is so commercialized. The people that come to subscribe as members of political parties do so for money. The people that get to offer themselves do so for money, because you wonder why a person that has offered to stand is able and happy to spend much more money than they would actually earn legitimately over the 5-year tenure. And then you get to ask yourself, because the mathematics does not add up. Okay, then you get to see there is a problem here. And then you come down to political parties, and then you see that there is one political party that is actually having so much spending power that seems to crowd out the rest of the political parties. The others get to be also participants. Okay. And so the electoral playing field doesn't get to be diverse. Why now? As we head into 2021, having seen the experiences of 2016, but also having continued to see how it has gone evolving, the writing is on the wall. Okay. That 2021
we'll get into the detail. Let me get let's run this like the symposium it is supposed to be.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
We have a keynote presentation, a brief keynote from Dr. Ohman, who is joining us via a Zoom link from Prague, Czech Republic. Doctor, do we now have you? Dr. Ohman? Do I have Dr. Ohman? Okay, we'll get to him as soon as we're able to have him. I can see him. He seems to be on, but we're failing to get his audio clear in studio. But you are in circumstances where we have COVID-19 that has, for all intents and purposes, significantly disrupted the preparations for the 2021 elections. Does COVID-19 have an impact, in your view, on the aspect of money and politics as we head to the elections?
Yes,
I was being reminded earlier today, I think Peter Majela, who's a lawyer in this town, was reminding people who intend to contest for particular positions to check the timetable, the revised timetable, roadmap given by the Electoral Commission. Some should have resigned by Friday. Those serving in government or public office should have resigned on Friday. And those who needed to have their academic papers checked or verified by the National Council for Higher Education should also have had their, especially those standing for special interest groups and local government elections, should have had theirs checked. So we are in the middle of this campaign already, but it's very unusual circumstances. So what is the impact?
So we think the impact is going to be enormous. First of all, when you conduct campaigns in a situation where the churches are not open, the schools are not open, you're not permitted to do to carry out open air campaign rallies, you're restricted to the media. That the impact is that by all intents and purposes you would spend less. Because first of all, we do know that most
ideally
of the
you should spend less. Yes.
Because we do know that most of the spending that candidates incur goes through fundraisings in churches. The other bit of it goes into contributions towards school fees to the children of the voters. But also the campaign rallies get to be expensive because when you're organizing a rally, a lot of effort and money goes into it. And so if that portion of campaign spending is taken away and then you're restricted to the media, you should ordinarily on paper spend less. All right.
But what are your own findings indicating? Because the question there would be for me, what is the more dangerous money in politics? Is it the money you spend on media, for example, like we have seen with the American election? It's very expensive, but a lot of that money is spent on marketing the candidate. Yes, how it is sourced is a problem in the US for its own context. But in the Ugandan context, is it money that is used to bribe or influence voters? Or is it the money that is spent on having a chivulu, if we could borrow the word, for your campaign rallies?
There are two aspects to this. Of course, let's say that the most common aspect of campaign spending to the ordinary voter is that which speaks to the money that goes into the pockets of the voter, the inducement of the voter. Okay, that's the common one. But the most worrying is when these candidates get to spend lavishly on a number of things. I'll give you an example. If you have this candidate who, when they organize campaign rallies, it's a rally that has such a flashy platform, has quite a number of musicians singing, is a place where people come, eat, drink, and feast. But also on a daily basis, he has this long track which has a very powerful radio system with the Kadodi dancers. They are making rounds every day of the 90 days of campaigns. That escalates the cost. Now, when that happens, you get to see that well-intentioned members of society that would have offered themselves do not offer themselves. But also the candidate himself gets into a situation where
or herself,
get into a situation where they are going to spend much more they could ordinarily earn from their salaries and allowances over the 5-year period. And therefore, they get to be boxed in a situation where they are vulnerable to capture. It could be captured by those that want to bankroll their political campaigns for quid pro quo reasons that you get there when you get into political office. Then you are able to make sure that I get all the public contracts. Or it could be dirty money coming into politics. And so this is the most worrying one, because once dirty money gets into politics, and the problem with our Uganda is that we never get to know the source of this money, okay? And so the darkness and opaqueness
are there no laws guiding declaration of sources of income, of funding for, one, political parties as organizations, but also for candidates contesting for political office?
The only laws we have had until now are laws that require political parties to submit to the Electoral Commission details of their, expenses and income and expenditure over a 12-month period, the audit reports. Okay, that's all the only law we have been having, but that speaks only to the routine operation of political parties. Now, when it comes to election campaigns,
is that under the Political Parties and Organizations
Political Parties and Organizations Act. But when it comes to election campaigns, we would not have any provision in law that mandatorily requires candidates and political parties to to mandatorily disclose the sources of the money, let alone reporting on it. So how much did you use? Where did it come from? What did you spend on it? That is completely devoid. And if you look at other electoral jurisdictions where they have this, they have managed to control the negative influence of money on electoral outcomes, they have also introduced caps to the fact that there is a limit beyond which you can't go, however much you are resourced as a political party or as a candidate. Now, those we don't have here. And so, in the absence of those legislations, in the absence of the requirements for disclosure and so the lack of transparency, you get to see that anything happens when a candidate is outsourcing their campaigns. And so this is not a good situation to be in as a democracy, because like I said, that money gets into politics, corruption gets to blossom and thrive. And the reason that happens is because the candidates get to be captured, and one way of getting out of it is to
Let me go back to the question I put to you earlier, Henry. For me, the bigger question is, candidates or people seeking elective office complain that the bigger problem is you are trying to literally buy the vote. To influence minds by putting up flashy adverts on TV, putting up well, how would I put it? Yes, those very extravagant campaign rallies with a bed being pulled on a truck, with dancers at the back, with a public address system, flashing your message. Is that as toxic to democracy as where a candidate is, for example, organizing a rally, and that rally is being attended by 20,000 people, and they have to organize 10,000 shillings for transport refund? You talked about a meal. Or you are a political party, the ruling party in Uganda, for example, and you're gathering 8,000, 10,000 of your national council, which is the highest political body of the ruling party. You're gathering them in Nambole Stadium for the next 2-3 days, and you're paying them, apart from accommodation and meals, you're also paying some money in form of transport. Never mind that you have transported them. The money that goes into the individual pocket, the pocket of the individual voter, and the money that goes on expenses related to campaigns. Which is which? I need
I think the money that goes into the expenses that goes with campaigns, because you see, for many candidates actually, when it comes to getting money to the voter, they actually do so through campaign agents. And so on the ground, you have these men and women who have profiled themselves as those that hold sway within the electorate. Someone comes to you, approaches you, candidate, and says, behind me I have 10,000 voters. And therefore, to get to them, you have to go through me. So I need this much to make sure that my voter, the people behind me.
What does that much do?
So that much, he gets it and pockets most of it, and then passes on a few to the voters. And so these men and women who call themselves campaign agents are one of the biggest costs of campaigning. I'll give you an example. If you speak to most of the candidates today, many of them, of course, had budgets of 400 million, 500 million, but some of them, when they went to consult with their campaign agents, they have been advised to increase that money. Okay?
Under this COVID situation?
And so they tend to be the ones that determine how much you should spend. But also, when you get broke, they seem to also be brokers for money lenders, because we have seen them on a number of occasions, not only advising candidates to borrow, but also being connected to the sources of the money. And so
Henry, can I disrupt you? I understand now I have Dr. Ohman joining us from Prague in the Czech Republic. Doctor, do I have you?
Yes, you do.
Thank you. Waiting for you, been struggling with the internet connectivity. to get to you, but very nice to have you, Dr. Magnus Ohman. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Dr. Magnus Ohman is the director for the International Foundation for Electrosystems in the regional office in Europe, based in Prague, the Czech Republic. Help me with those pronunciations as well. Very nice to have you for this e-symposium, which we are running under the new COVID restrictions, largely unconventionally rather. We're doing it from the studios of NTV in Kampala, with you joining us from there. You had prepared a keynote that I would like you to briefly summarize from your experience working with IFES, looking at electrosystems not across the globe. Could you briefly bring us up to speed and all our viewers and the people following this discussion?
Absolutely, and thank you very much. The starting point for this is that money is an incredibly important part of the political processes all around the globe, and no less so in African countries. In fact, taking into account the financial situation in different countries, I would not be surprised if the election campaigns in some countries in Africa are among the most expensive in the world. Through money, political actors can influence the democratic process in a way that does not reflect how good their political ideas are or how capable the voters consider them. Okay, of course, money does not exist in isolation. It's a tool that can be used to influence the process. And by controlling how political parties and candidates raise and spend money, we can increase transparency in how the political process works in our country. So the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, or IFES, that I work for, supports transparency in political finance in many African countries. I worked with political finance in Africa for over 20 years. I have the honor to learn from many Africans who are experts on various aspects of these complex issues. And one thing I've learned is that it is not enough to have regulations. All African countries have rules on political finance, but these rules must be suited to each country and support the democratic goals in that country. And it gets worse. Even the most suitable rules will fail if we pay insufficient attention to implementation. The biggest problem with controlling political finance in African countries is that no institution is given the necessary mandate, resources, and political independence to monitor compliance. My final comment is we cannot solve the problems around money in politics in African countries through legislative change and formal oversight alone. It is essential that the media and civil society are vigilant, and longer-term progress requires that politicians act responsibly and that voters consider what do they expect from their politicians and act in the interest of sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Doctor, let me stay with you for a minute. On that same question, I was asking Henry where he thinks money becomes very toxic in campaigns, money in politics, where it becomes more toxic. You have a situation in some jurisdictions where the money is used to directly bribe voters. In some others, the money is used to promote a particular candidate or political party. And you raise a very important question. Should we be focusing on what the money is spent on or where the money is coming from?
Well, that's an easy question. We need to do both. If someone wants to represent the people, if someone wants to govern our country, we need to know where the money comes from, because that person will in one way or another have a connection and possibly a dependency on those who fund their campaign. We also need to know how they spend this money. If they spend it on regular campaigning, that's fine. All election campaigns cost money, right? this is not about trying to get rid of money, because that does not work. But if they spend it on things like bribing voters, influencing the process, we need to know, and we need to be able to vote for someone else and possibly put that politician in prison.
Okay, now that was the easier question. Maybe the harder question is, where you have incumbent governments spending money which they do not necessarily account for or tell you its source, and those governments are responsible for enforcing the source of financing for parties in the opposition. How do you deal with that conundrum? Because political parties in Uganda, for example, and on most of the African continent, will tell you, I tell you my sources of financing, the government is going to go hard on the people trying to give me a contribution, be them local business people or international friends or other people, when the government's own sources of financing are fused with state resources. How do you deal with that?
Well, this is a real problem, and it is a very complicated issue that we have been dealing with for many decades. And it's finding a balance between the right of actors to campaign proactively and have a very engaged debate with the voters, while at the same time the voters have the right to know where does the money come from. So there are a number of things that we need to have in place. We need to have legislation that requires both all actors to be transparent in their financing. We need to have legislation that stops whoever happens to be incumbent from using the powers of the state to target opposition individuals or their supporters. We need to have public institutions that say, I'm not going to be involved in anything that is not in the interest of my institution and therefore the interest of the people of my country. And we need to have media and civil society that monitor such activities and make it clear to show to the people and indeed the international observers and actors that this is happening in our country. We need to have all of these things in place to be able to solve this issue, and it does take time.
Thank you. I just needed to bring you up to speed. We also have a colleague from Nigeria, Dr. Ukase. Dr. Patrick Ukase is joining us from Nigeria, Enyimba State, in Kogi State. Enyimba. Anyimba or Anyimba? Enyimba. Okay, Anyimba. Doctor, do I have you? Dr. Ukase? Do I have Dr. Ukase?
Yes, good day.
Yes, Dr. Ukase, very nice to have you. I wanted... Yes. So we already have Dr. Magnus Ohman. We've just been listening to from him. I hope you heard what he was saying. I have Henry Muguzi from AXIM in Uganda here in studio, but I'll also be joined by Dr. Businje Kabumba, who's a lecturer at Makerere University School of Law, and Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogerere, a veteran politician, now retired, and a former presidential candidate in 1996. Who will also be joining us. Unfortunately, we don't have women on the panel. I can see Dr. Semoge there ready to join us. Give us your experience from where you sit in Nigeria. I know you have spent time and you've written papers on money and politics. And when it comes to the African continent, I don't want to isolate it to the African continent because money is an important factor in politics across the world. The Americans have tried to skirt around it. They haven't succeeded because now the money is going through vehicles that are created specifically to fund the campaigns without linking it directly to a particular candidate. Could you share with us from your experiences in Nigeria and on the African continent, what, in your view, is the problem that we need to be dealing with as regarding money and politics on this continent?
Well, thank you very much. Let me take it from where Dr. Oman stopped. Like he rightly said, the issue of money in politics has been a recurring decimal in politics, particularly in Africa. Of course, there are extant laws and regulations trying to govern how political parties get money and how they also spend this money. In Nigeria particularly, we do not lack laws that tries to explain how political parties get money, the limit or the ceiling of the amount of money they should raise for each election. For instance, in the 2015 elections, all the political parties surpassed, in terms of generating money for campaign, all the political parties surpassed, the ceiling that is put, particularly for the presidential elections. And my findings also show that all the political parties overspent, spent more money that was required for them to spend during that elections. And so this poses a number of questions about the efficacy of our democracy. Once political parties generate money the way, especially ruling parties, get illicit money from contractors, drug barons, and so on and so forth. And so once we are able to track the way political parties get money and how they spend it, our democracy is going to be in a dire, problem. Now, let me say that the crisis that we face in Africa today has to do with the nature and character of our politics. If we don't fix our politics, we definitely cannot fix the economy. And so political parties and the type of democracy we practice throws up, the type of economy that we have. And so in the last 20 years, particularly, let me talk for Nigeria, in the last 20 years of our democracy, we've seen a situation where politicians spend beyond their limits. They generate money beyond the ceiling and also spend beyond that limit. There are laws, like I said initially. The 1999 Constitution of Nigeria, as amended, states very clearly that 6 months after every election, the political party is expected to submit its audited accounts to the election management body. But I can tell you for free that this has hardly been the case. Quite often, elections come and go. The election management bodies have become toothless, especially in terms of monitoring election and campaign finances. And so that is where we found ourselves today. And a number of civil society organizations have been trying to work in this regard, but the implementation has been the challenge.
Isn't the electoral management body empowered enough with those laws to demand that that accountability is done, that the source of financing is made clear? And I put this to you specifically because, unlike Uganda, you've had opportunity to change government in your last election when Goodluck Jonathan lost his election and Buhari came in. Do you have what is it that the electoral management body can do to enforce the law that it has to facilitate it gain this access to the source of money?
I can't hear you clearly.
I was saying, yes, I was asking the question that why is it that electoral management bodies are unable to enforce the laws that they have to demand for this, the sources of financing and regulation of money in politics?
I think, personal opinion, I think that election management bodies in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, lack the capacity, lack the technical know-how to be able to monitor election finances. You know that for you to be able to manage election finances, you need to have a whole lot of capacity and the required equipage to be able to do that. Now, quite often, election management bodies in Nigeria are more interested in conducting elections. They are not interested in, investigating or interrogating how monies are generated by these political parties. All they are interested in is, so there is need for them to activate the aspect of monitoring of campaign and election money. As long as they don't do that, it becomes difficult. So in Nigeria, what election management bodies have been doing in the last 20 years is to conduct elections. In fact, even election malpractices, people that are involved in vote buying, some of them are arrested, and quite often you find that it is even difficult to prosecute any of them. For the last elections that took place in 2019, I'm not aware of anybody that has been prosecuted for vote buying or whatever. And so that is the situation that we found ourselves today.
Thank you. Let me see if I have Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogerere. Do I have him? Do I have Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogerere? Yes, Dr. Kawanga Semogerere, very nice to have you. Can you hear me?
Thank you. May I know who you are?
Yes, my name is Charles Mwangusha, and we are coming to you from the studios of NTV here in Kampala. We are on this e-symposium on money in electropolitics in Africa. I hope you had the opportunity to listen in to Dr. Magnus Ochman joining us from Prague in the Czech Republic. He heads, he's the director in at IFES, which is the alliance. IFES is the international Foundation for Electrosystems, which is a global body. We also had just heard from Dr. Patrick Ukase, who's joining us from Nigeria. He lectures at a university in Nigeria. He's just been speaking to us. And I have in studio Henry Muguzi from the Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring here in Kampala. And we also have online joining us Dr. Businje Kavumba from Makerere University. Now, Dr. Semogerere, you ran a political party, the Democratic Party, for some years. You've been active on the Ugandan political scene for the last, I can say, maybe 50 plus years in this country. And more importantly, you authored a book called Reality Check, Political Party Financing in Uganda, a critical analysis in reference to other countries. My question to you is a general one. Could you give us a snapshot on your appreciation of money, the crossroad between money and politics, and how it influences democracy, particularly in this country and on this continent?
Thank you. I'm glad you have read my book on political party financing. In that book, I set out a 6-point feature framework which explains the kind of support which parties require for proper functioning, particularly during election time. But I said these features are conditional on the ideological, constitutional, and legal framework. And it's my experience in this country, and from the information I have even from other countries, particularly in Africa, that the ideological setting is faulty. It's authoritarian. Consequently, the mechanisms which would be put in place to enable parties to access the money that is required for them to perform their work properly cannot do it properly. These conditions are subject to authoritarian control. When leadership is not convinced about, for instance, multi-party dispensation in a country, it will use all the power it has to make it very, very difficult for the opposition parties to freely access money, even from their own members, let alone from those who are better off, say, in business, but depend very much on working harmoniously with the government at the time. So my conclusion is that we must start with the ideological, constitutional, legal framework to liberate political parties in this direction of receiving and utilizing money for the activities and particularly for election time. And coupled with that are for instance, the administration which manages or controls the financing. In this case, in this country here, the Electoral Commission, if it is obligated to do what the government directs in this regard, there is a problem of that body not acting independently and professionally in its management of the financing of the political parties. So the problem starts there.
There is a major question, Dr. Semogerere, and I want to pick it from point number 3 of the 6-feature model and its recommended application for Uganda. In your book, you talk about sources of controlled funding. And under this, you have 2 sub-points. One, you say the principal source of public funding should be the treasury, money going to the political parties.
Yes.
That is happening in Uganda, depending pro rata on representation in parliament. Do you think that is that fair to other political parties that are emerging? That's number one. Number 2, you say, in addition, voluntary contributions in a formalized and transparent form should be attracted through the various mechanisms of tax incentives, e.g. tax rebates for political contributions made, as is the case in South Africa. And I want to pick this from the point you just made. It's difficult to mobilize money from members subscribing to political parties themselves. It's harder to get money from those who are better off running businesses. Could you explain how you navigate through those 2 issues and how you can help functioning of healthy multi-party politics in this country?
Well, now the control, I mean the sourcing of this money. If you look at the sources and the formula or the criteria on which that money is distributed to the different political parties. In a country like Uganda, where members of political parties in parliament are elected on a winner-takes-all electoral basis, you have an initial problem that formula does not necessarily ensure that the members who are elected in parliament command the same support compared to other parties or to their rivals in this case. Some person may even get as low as 20 or 30% of the votes in his or her own constituency on the basis of this winner takes all. And if you read that book and also my other writings on this matter, I have strongly supported a change of the system from winner takes all to proportional representation system, which ensures that the people who are elected actually command majority of the voters in their constituencies, whether it's one party or political party. So that is one very important point.
Kavumba online, I need to get Dr. Businja Kavumba on. Dr. Semogerere, I'll be coming back to you in a moment. Dr. Businja, do I have you?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Businja Kavumba, you are a constitutional lawyer, you're also a lecturer in international law. The bigger question that's coming up since we started this e-symposium is regulation of money in politics through the law. But these countries, especially on the African continent, and this country in particular, is replete with potential landmines when you use a strictly legal approach to dealing with the question. All the contributors, from Dr. Magnus Ohman to Dr. Ukase in Nigeria, to Dr. Semogerere, to Henry Muguzu, whom I have in studio here, have talked about where you have the incumbent government also regulating the electoral body and the weakness of electoral bodies to enforce these regulations. How do you navigate around this? Is the legal approach the right approach? Creation of laws.
Thank you, Charles, and my regards to esteemed panelists, many of whom are my senior colleagues. Now, I think the legal approach is important, but as colleagues have said, one has to take into account the question of ideology. And I think Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogere, hit the nail on the head when he mentioned the idea of the ideology, the constitution, and the laws. Now, just taking it from the ideology, I'd like to sort of take it a little bit further. The question of law and society. So we have this constitution and we have these laws, and I think Dr. Magnus also touched on it a bit, and also Kase. We have this set of laws, but you also have society. You have Article 79 that says the role of parliament is to make law. But at the same time, if you go to many of our societies here in Uganda and you ask what is the role of a parliamentarian, the answer you'll be given is to contribute to weddings, contribute to funerals, to pay school fees. So there has to be the question of how do you harmonize the law in the books and the law in society, societal norms, values, and aspirations, as envisaged in Article 126, Clause 1 of the Constitution. There is that disconnect. And while Dr. Paul Kawanga talks about the ideological issue, I think there's the question of societal norms and values that have to also be contended with. Now, so related to that is then the question of incumbency. And it's also linked to a point Dr. Kawanga made about the question of the nature of our state, the nature of an autocratic state that then is reflected in the implementation of laws or lack thereof, and then the power of incumbency. And so it becomes very difficult, even with a perfect legal system. If you have an electoral commission, for instance, that has been appointed by one person based on longevity in office of the one branch, that then also has affected the nature of knowledge, the entire judiciary. The High Court, Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court has now been appointed by one person. That challenge the nature of the state itself in the question of patronage and the question of the military or the autocratic nature of that state then permeates into all other fields. I'll just mention one last point, Charles, related to everything I've said. You have the question of direct expenditure that you can perhaps control, but there's also a question of indirect expenditure. Historically, there was a question of privatization that opened up monies available to certain persons who could then exercise patronage through parastatals. That was then replaced by districtization, where you had districts being given on the basis of certain forms of demand. Now, sort of navigating the distinction between legitimate districts and districts that are created as a form of patronage, often just before major electoral events, can be very difficult. The most recent now is the question of cities. And I had, for instance, the Right Honorable Speaker telling constituents in Jinja that, look, initially there was a certain X amount of cities contemplated, but I insisted that Jinja must also be a city. So privatization, followed by districtization, now followed by questions of granting of city status. So the power of incumbency, the question of law and society, I think questions we must contend with. Charles, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I want to stay with you for a moment because you raise two very critical things, two critical issues rather. Number one is you talk about the evolution. We didn't arrive at districtization and now creation of cities I must tell you, I also come from a city, and I belong to about 3 or 4 multiple cities. I'm a citizen of many cities, and of course that will balloon the representation in Parliament. You talked about societal norms, and I was challenging before we came on air. I was challenging Henry on when did this start, and he was retracing for us when we started elections, just pre-independence and post-independence. But we can lock this in on the last 34 years, 35 years of the incumbent government. We had an election in a general election in 1996. We had election for the Constituent Assembly in 1994, 93, 94. We had an election for expanding the NRC in 1987. And then you have the regular elections after the 1995 Constitution took effect. 1996, 2001, 2006, 2011, 2016. And in each of these elections, research done by ACFIM indicates that the question of money has been growing exponentially. In fact, in one of their latest reports, ACFIM says the cost of contesting for a political seat has risen so high that this study estimates contestants for Member of Parliament in 2021, the coming election, to spend upwards of 500 million shillings, which is about 135,000, I don't know what exchange rate you're using, 137,000 United States dollars. This creates for me the link between the pressure from societal norms and the absence of the law, or deliberate pouring of money into the electoral process to poison the minds of the electorate in order to influence their vote. Can we look at that a little bit?
Two related questions, Charles. There's the pressure from society, which is legitimate at some point, because if you think of in Kenya, in Uganda, if one would say, oftentimes there's an absence of the state in its welfare sense. The absence of districts, the absence of hospitals, the absence of schools, the insufficiency of those critical institutions, and the overwhelming presence of police and other security agencies. So the Ugandan citizen fundamentally experiences the state in its coercive sense, in its coercive form, rather than in its welfare sense. So in a sense, the election then becomes a time for the citizen to extract something back from the state that they cannot ordinarily get in between elections. So there's that sense of it is unto it, to use the expression by Makela. So there is that societal pressure from below. But at the same time, and I think this is where there's also at some point a coincidence of interest between the parliament and the executive. And sometimes it's very difficult to be a Ugandan, frankly. Often the very first agenda item of all parliaments in Uganda has been increasing the emoluments. And on that issue, but it's across the board, across, there's no partisanship.
We're having a bit of a difficult connection with Dr. Busingye Kabumba.
Which, of course, if you trace back enough to cover the loans they have incurred towards the elections, etc. So we're trapped as citizens. We're trapped between a rock, which is the executive, and a hard place, which is parliament. And frankly, extricating ourselves from this dilemma can be very, very difficult. But I'll mention one last point, Charles. In this coincidence of interest between parliament and the executive, and I think the COVID crisis really demonstrated this very much. When it comes to something, you then have the effects of this. And for instance, the attempts to amend the laws in July 2019 that were passed in March 2020, the Presidential Elections Amendment Act and the Parliamentary Elections Amendment Act. In both cases, you did not quite have regulations of expenditure. What you had were regulations of sources, and there are no prizes for guessing really who are being targeted.
Yes.
You had in the recent amendments increasing nomination fees. So you have elected representatives, making it difficult for opposition candidates, particularly, to have a fair shake at the table. And finally, Charles, is the question of a constitutional question, and this touches on what Dr. Kawanga said. there's a constitutional design flaw, I think, in the 1995 Constitution. Article 59 on the right to vote is in Chapter 5 on the representation of the people. You do not have a right to vote in Chapter 4, which is the Bill of Rights. So in essence, electoral justice has been removed from the normal traditional Bill of Rights. And I think that's problematic because, in a sense, we don't then think of the right to vote and right to political participation in human rights terms, in access terms, in demand terms. What I think should be one step towards constitutional reform in this area is to have the equivalent of Article 81 of the Kenyan Constitution, which makes it clear, general principles of electoral reform, and makes it clear as one of the principles that the idea of non-corruption, non-influence, non-intimidation is an aspect of the right to participate and the right to vote as a constitutional matter and as a human right matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Businje Kavumba. Gentlemen, we only have a panel of, they call it a mano, because we only have men on this panel, on this symposium, contributing to this discussion. But I'd like to request you to kindly stay where you are, especially those of you joining us virtually. We'll take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, I'm interested in two questions. In 1996, an election in which Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogere participated as a candidate, the form of influencing politics then, the vote, was in actual items purchased. Pieces of soap, sugar, salt that were bought in bulk, packaged in sizes, so you have a bar of soap sliced in tablets, and then packaged and delivered at the homes of the voters, and counting the voters. The closest that comes to me in this election is what you have had provided by COVID. Who is distributing posho and beans to voters, and how that will influence their choice in elections when it comes to 2021. And Dr. Businje Kavumba raises something very interesting. These reforms that are being proposed in 2019, passed earlier this year, who do they target? Because it's not just those in the opposition. If you're an incumbent, and from your parliamentary salary and emoluments, you're able to raise an increased amount for nomination fees, you're actually blocking your opponent who doesn't have money, a young person who maybe hasn't had a job but is thinking they can contribute to, or you're aiding a person who has been holding a public office and has amassed some money on their own to be able to navigate through this. Henry, let's deal with that after a very short commercial break. More than you do. They hijack it. You're still watching this e-symposium on money in electropolitics in Africa. We have a very varied panel, and I need to clarify one thing. I have been talking about it since we started, that we don't have a female representation on this panel. It's not by design. ACFIM did invite and got confirmation from as you have seen on the adverts promoting this discussion, and if you see on the social media platforms, we expected to have from the ruling National Resistance Movement and also a member of government, the Honorable Dr. Ruth Nankavirwa, joining us during this discussion, but for some reason she was unable to join us, and efforts to find a quick replacement haven't yielded much fruit since yesterday or the other day, and she didn't nominate someone to sit in her position. So from a government perspective and from a gender representation perspective, that should have been catered for. My name is Charles Mwangusha-Mpagi. I am moderating this e-symposium. I have with me in studio Henry Muguzi. Henry Muguzi leads the Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring, ACFIM, which is a civil society group that focuses on electoral democracy, but the aspect of money in politics largely. I have from Prague, the Czech Republic, I have Dr. Magnus Ohman, who gave us a keynote at the beginning of this discussion. Doctor, I hope we still have you. Just raise up your hand and to confirm that I still have you. Dr. Magnus Ohman. Yes, wave to our viewers. I have Dr. Patrick Ukase joining us from Nigeria. Dr. Ukase, could you also wave to our viewers and confirm that we still have you on the panel? Yes, yes, I can see you there. Dr. Ukase teaches at Kogi State University in Anyimba. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I have joining us from Ruvaga, veteran politician, now retired and former leader of the Democratic Party, also former presidential candidate, Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogerere. He's written a book which I've been referring to here, Reality Check, Political Party Financing in Uganda, a critical analysis in reference to other countries. And he has a what does he call it? Let me see. A 6-feature model and its recommended application in Uganda. Thank you, thank you. I also have from Makerere University, Dr. Businje Kabumba, who teaches constitutional and international law at Makerere University. Dr. Businje, do I still have you? I think I still do. Yes, you've put up your hand. Henry, let me come back to you. This evolution, 1996, and I want also Dr. Semogerere to come in. You have an election where the influencing of voters, apart from what everybody agrees, money must be spent to access these voters, to sell your message to them, to reach them through normal financing. A part of its toxic nature, and I think Dr. Businje Kabumba talked about it very well, is where you have the state abdicating its responsibility to provide social services and amenities to the population, and the voters in a way deciding to take their chance when you come around looking for their vote. So they extract their rent now and do not mind what you do with the vote they have given you over a period of 5 years, which I think is the bigger problem. How did we evolve to where we are? That now you just don't need to hire the best public address system, make the best adverts, especially now under COVID, where the election is going to be largely on media and virtual. I mean the campaign is going to be largely via media, the various media platforms, to where you need the voter is looking at you and saying, okay, give me what belongs to me now. I don't care what happens once you have been elected. And the MPs, the elected leaders, turn around when they arrive in parliament and begin complaining, I'm paying school fees, I am treating everybody, my car is the ambulance, I have to buy a private ambulance for my constituents. Yes, the state has abdicated its responsibility through these elected political leaders.
Absolutely. From the lessons of 1996, where they were delivering gifts in real form, in kind, to 2001, when it was a combination of both money and the ruthlessness of the structures of the state. But I think when you look back, the real turning point comes in 2016. 2006, you have the country going back to multi-party democracy. You have competition from parties such as the Uganda People's Congress, the Democratic Party, who are used to the terrain. And then you have this NRM party, which is young. It has never tested the terrain of multi-party, but they have all the access to sources of funding. I think it's then that competition gets to be so cutthroat that now we start to see money coming to the picture. So 2006, when competition is really high, faced with the competition from all these political parties, it starts to now to sink and register in the minds of the political actors that you see money can work, because it actually worked in some constituencies where those that had funding really made it through. And so we would see then it taking a different dimension in 2011 to where we are now. So I think the real source and origin of this commercialization of electoral politics can be traced from as far back as 2006, when Uganda returns back to multi-party electoral politics.
Dr. Semogerere, watching from where you sit now, your own campaign in 1996 and the subsequent campaigns in 2001, 2006, 2011 to 2016, and now going into 2012, how has the use of money changed over the years?
Well, first of all, in the concept paper which you gave us, research was carried out in Kampala, and as many as 42% of the respondents confessed that they would give money, they would give their vote in exchange for money given to them. Then what about the sources of the money? You will find that the incumbency has free access to a lot of public funds, including money he gives out in official donations, which at the beginning was only about 6 billion, and has been going higher and higher ever since. And now it's almost 200 billion.
Yes.
Yes. And in the course of duty, the incumbent and his followers, friends in the party, ministers and other DCs, they have a lot of public funds which they access and give out in donations on various functions and otherwise. So this is a way, a very subtle way to influence the vote at the end of the day. But now it's not only a question of money, which explains the election results in Uganda, not only in 1996 and now, but even before. You have, for instance, the governance and the security agencies. When they oppress the opposition parties, ordinary voters are affected, and many times they fear to stand up and stand behind their candidates. In addition, money is now used even to bring in otherwise illegitimate voters. In 1996, people were ferried in from Rwanda, and other people were registered multiple times. So these things are brought about because of control, but also money, which is accessed by leaders in the government who don't really cherish multi-party politics.
About earlier, and everyone else, I think, was commented, has talked about it. There is that opposition fear that if the law and the electoral management body is controlled by the government, is not really independent,
yes,
then the opposition suffers if it receives money from well-wishers because they will be easily targeted. How do you propose a navigation around that fear? Especially, if I use the example of Uganda, the ruling party dominates parliament. So the law that it passed that Dr. Businja was talking about, was referring to, is a law that those in a dominant position in parliament have sway over. The opposition parties, one, even the state funding that they receive is pro rata on the number of MPs that they have. So the ruling party has the most number. It also officially gets the most money from the state, officially. Two, it is in charge of the treasury, and Dr. Semoge is telling you, as we speak now, the president has a kitty of 200 billion Uganda shillings to give in presidential donations. It's been growing over the years. So how do, when we are advocating legislation, creating regulations, how do you navigate those fears of the opposition? Dr. Ohman? I see Dr. Semogere wants to come in and respond to that. Dr. Magnus Ohman, are you on? If you could come in, and then I'll go back to Dr. Semogere quickly.
I think in this case, we need to get together and look at the failings occasioned by constitutional lapses, I think it is necessary to change some of the laws which affect the setting up of institutions in charge of managing elections and overseeing the financial expenditures, including that of the incumbents. Other advanced democracies, like in the case of Germany, there is actual control as to how much how much money a person can give to a political party, to control it, to stay within limits, so that that person cannot in the end take away the autonomy of the party as a whole, and more or less treat it as a personal property. And the state itself is detached from day-to-day, even from making appointments of these people who manage, so that that independence of the professionals who are in charge of controlling the financing.
Around that, weak enforcement, especially against incumbent governments that also use or have the opportunity to use their majority in parliament to design the laws in a manner that benefits them, and they have access to state resources. How would you advise opposition players to deal with it? Dr. Othman? Yes, I can see you. Are you on? Yes.
And I want to just agree with what was just being said about the importance of strong state institutions and a separation between the state and whatever party that happens to be in power. As long as those two are merged, we can pretty much pass any laws we want, and it's not really going to change the situation. It's when state institutions can say we do not accept this type of behavior by any political actors, that enforcement of political finance regulations become possible, and that also other state institutions will not act in a way that includes, for example, abuse of state resources. And I think if we look at other countries, Germany was mentioned, the main issue there is there are rules, fine, but the main thing is there's a clear separation between the political parties and the state itself. So that is a key aspect to address in this particular situation.
Dr. Othman, let me stay with you for a moment. Democracies are now pointing in the direction of digital solutions for campaign finance disclosure and reporting. In the case of Uganda, where disclosure requirements are coming for the very first time, how prepared should electoral management bodies be, in your view? And let me put just a little bit of background to this. The law in Uganda provides the Electoral Commission, which is also the registrar of political parties, to receive audited accounts of political parties, a declaration of audited accounts of political parties every year. Compliance in this country has been difficult, but as activists like Muguzi will tell you here, even accessing those declarations where they have complied is difficult from the electoral management body. So do you think there is a solution in the digital world to access this information? And number two,
oh, absolutely.
Yes, and number two, Doctor, if you could also share with us from your perspective, if there are any opportunities that come with COVID-19, where the electoral management body in this country has advised that all campaign or has decided that all campaigns will be done largely virtually on the media.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, we must realize that the technological opportunities available to us now will not fundamentally change the very difficult issues that we have been discussing through this entire event. These fundamental issues of politics and how politicians and the voters engage with each other are not altered by the availability of new online tools. However, there are significant advantages. I'll stress two main ones. One is transparency, the fact that you can get this information from parties and candidates, you can make it available to the people, to media, to civil society in a much more user-friendly way than you could if it's just on paper. So if I want to know if a certain individual has made a donation to any party, I should be able to go in and search for that information. This can play a significant role in helping to increase awareness about these issues. The second aspect of that is that with online data, it allows us to control the accuracy of financial reports in a much better way if we can cross-check what comes in from a party or a candidate with what is available in other data sources. So, for example, in tax records on customs, and so on. Of course, this depends on the quality of the data records we have. If people are not paying tax, then the tax records are not going to tell us very much. Secondly, thank you very much for raising COVID. I've been discussing this a lot with people in Africa as well as outside, and I think there's no doubt that there will be a difference in how things will work. I think in one sense, the difference in Uganda and in Africa will be smaller than in other parts of the world, and in another sense, the impact may be bigger, right? I think it's quite likely that the impact of campaigning may be more limited than we've seen in other regions. In some parts of the world where everyone is online pretty much all the time, there's been a habit of online campaigning also before the situation. We may see a significant shift in the campaigning activities by political parties and candidates. I'm far from sure, but I am expecting that in a number of African countries, the type of campaigning will not alter that much in the current pandemic. However, where we are likely to see a very significant change is in the economic impact of the pandemic. In many African countries, a lot of people are suffering economically, financially, because of the pandemic. That makes them more vulnerable for being targets of vote buying and similar activities that we've been discussing about. So I think there's a significant risk of increased mishandling and misuse of resources in that respect.
Thank you. Could you share with us from Nigeria any impact you foresee because of COVID-19 on the political landscape in your country and the countries that you study, specifically on the question of money in politics? Dr. Okase? Can I pass the question as we try to reestablish the link with Dr. Okase to Dr. Busingye Kabumba? Dr. Busingye, how do you see the impact of COVID-19? And I need to go back to you on that question. If you have weak regulators like we talked about, enforcing these tougher electoral laws, and we're suggesting that we make them even tougher, how do you navigate? You don't have declarations of audited accounts for political parties in this country. You go and get a few sheets of paper after an election cycle, and when Henry Muguza and his friends at ACFIM do their own study, they find the numbers don't add up. The parties tell you we spent so much. When you actually check how much they spent through other methods of verification, you find that they spent a lot more. How do you navigate around those issues?
Yeah, of course, Charles, we have we run a dual model here in Uganda, as in many places, I'm sure, where you have the formal economy and then you have another economy. You have civil servants and other persons who earn 1 million officially, but have assets in the excess of 1 billion. So in a declaration of income and it's always going to be a difficult thing. But that said, there's even the fundamental question itself, even before we're going to electoral financing. And I think there was a seriously missed opportunity for a serious reflection as to what COVID meant for normal life in Uganda as we knew it, including normal processes, registrations of persons, you know. I won't go into it, but the whole question of the state of emergency debate. If that had been more reflectively a response to even the choice as to whether to have elections or not. You know, I normally cite the quote, the Constitution is not the suicide pact. We're now caught in between the question of scientific elections, which are anything but, and as Dr. Oman has said, how are we going to reach a population that has challenges of access to internet in a country where you have a tax on the internet and you don't even have sufficient internet penetration, but you're telling parliamentarians that they must now campaign through there's a tension there of a considered, a thoughtful, a rational, a principled approach to the question as to whether to declare a state of emergency under the Constitution or not. But we are where we are. And already the situation in which we are is exposing some of those challenges, and the power of incumbency is getting even greater. One example, I think, Dr. Ruth Acheng, a perfect technocrat who was handling the public health crisis presented by COVID, and then suddenly Dr. Ruth, it's her right, of course, as a citizen, to declare a candidacy for parliament. But think about the unfortunate person that must run against Dr. Ruth Acheng, who is every day on TV telling us how. So, in other words, Dr. Ruth Acheng has access to the population about. So that's incumbency. That's incumbency right there. And that's reflected in so many other ways. And I think Dr. Kawanga made the point about the question as to how you come up in one of the presidential election petitions, where the executive announced a massive donation of halls just before elections. Now, how does the person on the ground distinguish between a government program and influence peddling, improper expenditure? One related point, Charles, is the question of, okay, and the Court of Appeal in particular has had to grapple with this particular point in relation to parliamentary election petitions, appeals that are coming to the Court of Appeal. The idea of community bribery, is there such a thing? And the Court of Appeal is grappling with this question. A member of a contestant donates an ambulance and emblazoned across the Charles Mangusha aspiring MP. Is that a bribe? Since it's not targeted to one particular person, is it a donation? And how do you distinguish between the two things? Difficult questions. Going back to the question still, of course, that we raised earlier as to our society and a missing state, the state that's missing in real terms. How to roll back that, I think, calls for at the root of all this.
I think, Dr. Busingye, we are grappling with the exact challenges.
Trust. At some point, we must go back to those fundamentals.
Thank you. Then we're grappling with exactly the challenge that our virtual, some people have called them scientific, and Dr. Busingye Kavumba calls it right and says they are nothing but scientific, is that if you have this kind of internet connectivity, how are you able to deliver the message? But also the other advantage that he was talking about, if you have had, for example, the president, I think we are running through 16, 17 addresses to the nation on specifically the subject of COVID-19. since March. But you have also had the president at multiple other events that give him exclusive access. And you're asking, where are his opponents? Now, if you take that down a little, you're talking about the Minister of Health, who is on your TV every day, and now in an electoral process. And people have been joking on social media, I think over the last 2 days, contrasting a photo of her doing, I think, her campaign consultations in a yellow dress, and a member of parliament, Semu Junganda, being roughed up by the police. On the other one, the police are protecting her. And this one, he's being roughed up by the police. And people also comparing. You have the government on one hand distributing relief food under COVID. You have Mohammed, Zake, the MP for Mitiana, hospitalized for distributing food. How do you navigate around some of those issues? Because at the end of the day, if you put a bill to the money spent on distributing relief food by the government and by politicians aligned to government that were not disrupted, the distribution of face masks, for example, and you monetize them, where, like Dr. Businje Kabumba was asking, where do you draw the line? What is government program? What is NRM delivered, for example, or People Power delivered, or UPC delivered, or People's Progressive Party delivered? In these circumstances, isn't that part of the conundrum that money in politics is? How does the regulation, revised or old as it was, the one coming into force now, how does it account for some of that? If you have an ambulance which is a running billboard for Henry Muguzi, and then you have another ambulance, a running billboard for Charles Mwangusha, another ambulance, a running billboard for Dr. Businje Kabumba, how do you account for that if you're tracking money and its influence on politics?
I think, Charles, you raised a very interesting point, and we are talking about the contradictions within of the state. And Dr. Kabumba put it very well. The state of Uganda and many other African states being present and absent at the same time. When you want it to deliver social services, it is not there. When you hold a placard to demonstrate your displeasure, it swings into action immediately. You wonder, where has it come from? It has not been here for so many years. And so that is the context within which we are trying to practice our democracy. And so a democracy where the lack of political tolerance is almost the norm. You have a government in power that is willing to use everything at its disposal to make sure that they stifle the coming up of the others. The other contradictions we have. You have the political parties that have not been able to train and bring through leadership. And so in a situation where one political party is quite strong and the other, because it leverages the presence and access to many state resources, and others that have been refused the chance to stand, let alone mobilize, you have these contradictions. And so when it comes to funding, the others who have been starved as well of the sources of funding, and one which has access to plenty, you see these dynamics. I think these are some of the things that I think the time has come for the citizens, the people of Africa, in our respective countries, to start a serious conversation about what kind of democracy do we want to exercise. Because you look at democracy the way it is defined by the makers, the framers of democracy, and get to contrast with what we have on the ground, you see the exact opposite. I think we need tolerance, we need openness, but also we need people who are able and willing to let democracy grow. At the moment, that seems to be missing in action.
I wanted, Dr. Ukase, do we have you back? We needed to share your experiences in Nigeria, especially under COVID-19. And I know that Nigeria, like you have seen the link with Dr. Businje Kabumba dropping, the states charge for bandwidth, the laying of cables within individual states, and that raises the cost of internet, and therefore you have a number of a significant portion of your population unable to access internet, or if they can access it, it's either unreliable or very expensive to access. You're trying to apply those in a situation where you have COVID-19, and you're trying to regulate money in politics. There are those political leaders, especially incumbents, who have access to the media for free for a long time. How do you quantify that when you're dealing with the question of money in politics?
Well, for us we need to contextualize this issue very, very well. When we think that because we have COVID-19, and so everything will fall into place. I'm not a pessimist, but I want to be pessimistic at this point. We need to understand the extent to which politicians and political parties are desperate. They are desperate for power. And when you are desperate for power, you do everything humanly possible to get power. Now, my elementary definition tells me that a political party is a group of people that believe in the same ideology, who work and make group efforts to win and control state power for the purpose of furthering that ideology. But in Africa, much of Africa, we have a new definition for political parties. For me, political parties are a group of people or group of businessmen or entrepreneurs who, make group efforts to win state power for the purpose of pursuing their business interests. And so when the intention is to pursue business interests, you do everything humanly possible to, profit in the process. And so the commercialization and monetization of our electoral process must be understood in the context of the desperation of politicians in Africa and in Nigeria. There are so many levels at which political parties continue to monetize and commercialize the process in order to win political power. And I do not think that because we have COVID-19, all of that will change. There is a saying that because birds have learned to fly without catching, men have equally learned to shoot without missing. The political parties and the politicians will go out of their way, despite all measures that are put in place to curtail, the commercialization and monetization of our electoral process. I'll give you a number of examples. In Nigeria, there are so many levels at which money is used to rig or to influence the people during elections. During the primary election process, delegates are bought. Aspirants at that point can move their delegates to a specific hotel for a period of time. At that point in time, the delegates are taken care of by the aspirants. Their hotel bills are paid, their food, their drinks, and they are kept in that place until the day of the election. They are moved in a bus to the venue of the election to vote for a specific aspirant. That is at one level. Then you have at the day before elections also. All these political parties have agents. They move from house to house and give people money to vote for them on the day of election. And on the day of election proper, there are so many measures or ways of rigging. One of them is at the polling unit. Even at the polling unit, money is shared. The polling agents representing election management bodies at that level are also influenced by money. When you go to the World Collation Center and to various levels of collection of results, you find that money plays a very important role. After the election results have been announced, political parties that feel that they were cheated approach various courts. At that level also, money still plays an important role in the judicial system. At this point, politicians try to bribe judges in order to get judgments that are favorable to them. So these are the levels at which elections are rigged. These are the levels at which politicians try to influence either the voters or those who are involved in conducting elections. And so now we have COVID. Particularly, we have two elections that will take place in Nigeria, in Edo State and Ogun State in the next 1-2 months. INEC, the election management body, has continued to say, please, because of COVID-19, political parties should use various electronic e-platforms to conduct their campaigns. But I can assure you that nothing will change. The politicians will still, like Dr. Oman said, the politicians still have agents that will visit people in their house. They still have, on the day of voting is not going to be done online. People will still go to polling booths to vote. And they have agents in polling booths that will continue to share money to the already pauperized citizens of Nigeria. A number of citizens are now impoverished because of COVID-19. So many people could not, do their businesses. And in the last 3-4 months, they do not even have money to feed their family. And this, provides a better opportunity for the politicians, even more than before, to rig or to influence the voters. So for me, I am worried that with the advent of COVID-19, we are likely to even see the politicians influencing voter behavior more than before. What can we do in the present circumstance? Dr. Oman has provided some suggestions. And I think we talked about implementation. We have extant laws. Quite often when these things take place at the polling booths, you find that even law enforcement agents find it difficult to react. Quite often, these things happen in the full glare of law enforcement agents. And so there is need, we just have to keep going back to law enforcement. There's need for law enforcement agents to begin to prosecute people that are involved in the commercialization and monetization of our electoral process. But beyond that, I think the civil society have a very, very important role to play in tracking how political parties get money and how they spend the money. Because the election management body clearly does not have the competence and the capacity to be able to do that. For instance, if the ruling party in Nigeria spends more than the amount of money that is required for an election, do you think that the election management body that is appointed by the ruling party can question the ruling party? It is not possible for election management body to question the ruling party because the chairman of that election management body is appointed by the president. And so that is why I think that civil society organizations, the press, will need to track and check what politicians are doing and how the politicians are spending money with a view to exposing what they have been doing in our electoral system.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have very, very active participation of our participants, especially on Twitter. The hashtag is MoneyPoliticsInAfrica, and I can see debate. Production team will help me with some of your comments, and I can share them. I've seen some comments from Patricia Munavi. I can see other people making comments. If you have questions, I also pick them up and see if I can ask. But I want to pick one of the participants to this e-symposium to share with us, because where you sit at the Public Policy Institute, Mr. Emmanuel Kitamirike, you're studying these things and you're engaging in these discussions around preparations for elections in 2021. Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Charles. My name is Emmanuel Kitamirike, and Charles, as we rightly say, we've been doing a study on the cost of politics, and we've been looking at almost all the aspects that we've been looking at. But one additional important aspect that we've been focused on is what is the impact of the cost of politics on inclusive political participation. And I'm not going to share preliminary analysis, but I want to share some insights because we just began the analysis. And I want to hint on something that has been touched on, but I will touch it from a different perspective, and that is the political architecture that we have in this country as a key driver of the cost of politics. I know that Dr. Kawanga has talked about the issue of ideology. I think Dr. Kabumba talked about the failure of government in delivering essential services. But I think what we are getting from the study that we are doing is that we have an extortionist patronage system that actually depends on money to survive. And this system demands allegiance and loyalty in exchange for resources. So if you're going to be part of this system, you must be loyal and you must pay allegiance to the system if you are going to survive in the political arena. And the most important thing that we need to note is that, you see, the challenge of addressing money in politics in this country is that money actually is the foundation on which this NRM system survives. So if you're going to remove it from the politics, you are actually talking about the very existence of the political system that we have at hand. I want to give you a very specific example. You've not talked about the issue of internal party candidate selection processes and how that is driving the cost of politics in this country. There are certain regions or districts in this country where when you get the yellow party card or you become the party flag bearer of NRM, you are already assured of winning the elections. So candidates will do whatever it takes to ensure that they actually get the flag of the party, because that is an assurance. But Charles, I think for me, where we need to pay a lot of attention, as most of the panelists have said, is then what needs to be done to ensure that we either reduce or actually regulate money in politics. I think for me, that's the elephant in the room. And we've talked about the issue of the electoral management board, specifically the Uganda Electoral Commission in this case. We all know that in Uganda, the regulatory framework is almost non-existent, as the EC is not held accountable for lack of regulatory expedience. You see, the EC, as seen in other countries, is preoccupied with delivering elections and not doing the other obligations or mandates, including ensuring that political parties are actually adhering to the Political Parties and Organization Act. And for me, the question is, how do we get the Electoral Commission to play this mandate? I think as citizens and civil society actors, we have an obligation to hold the Electoral Commission accountable to this mandate. If we don't do that, no one else is going to actually hold the EC accountable. Not political parties, because they benefit from the whole concept of money in politics. They are the ones that are either not submitting returns to the Electoral Commission or actually are engaged in practices related to increasing the money in politics. And I think for me, the conversation here should be one of engaging the EC to ensure that it is held accountable to undertake its mandate. Charles.
Emmanuel Kitamirike from the Public Policy Institute for those insights, and we'll be looking forward to reading your study and as we further this discussion through this campaign season in this country and through to the elections and beyond. I'd like to ask Dr. Magnus Ohman to prepare to respond on this as we come towards the end of this symposium. Election campaign financing trends and relevance of campaign finance laws in building sustainable democracy in Africa. What the impact is. I needed to go back on that and lock it in as we come towards the end. For Dr. Ukase, I would like you to think about mitigating the corrosive effect of money on electoral outcomes in Nigeria. What impact will COVID-19 have on this? You already talked about some of these issues, but I need you to hammer them in as we bring this discussion towards the end. For Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogerere, formal and informal oversight on of political party and campaign finance in Uganda. What impact will COVID-19 have from your perspective? Dr. Businje Kabumba, I need you to give me some recommendations on how we navigate through this. What can you propose as practical remedies for taming the use of excessive money in electoral politics in Uganda and elsewhere? I've seen Patricia Munabe. I would be really keen to have a lady come on, but if I don't, can I have another participant, someone following us on the Zoom link? Can production upgrade someone and get them to contribute? Just tell us your name. Yes, I can see. Just tell us your name and where you are contributing from, where you're following this symposium from. Put your question or comment very briefly. Is that Fortunate? Fortunate? We can see you, but we can't hear you. Yes, please do come on.
Yes. You can hear me now?
Yes, Fortunate, we can hear you. Your voice is a little bit low, but we'll be able to pick you.
Yeah, I'm not Fortunate.
Yes.
From Ruchida.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you can stabilize your camera, I think you're using your phone. Just stabilize and speak to us. The people in studio here, the producers, will try to increase your volume a little bit from here. Go ahead. Go ahead, Fortunate. Go ahead.
Africa has already
Yes.
a lot of economic hardship even before COVID-19. And now during the COVID pandemic, it is going to bring a lot of much gaps in the electoral financing. Since most of the incumbent MPs will be benefiting much, leaving out the people.
Go ahead, we can hear you. Unfortunately, we can hear you. Just go ahead. Just carry on. Okay, that's a little bit difficult. And since we are stressed for time, let me start with Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogerere to respond to the question I put to you, but also make your final comment to this discussion. If still you could help me mute Fortunate's call. Dr. Semogerere, if you could come in, give us that oversight in a form of wrap-up of this symposium. Political party and campaign finance in Uganda. What impact will COVID-19 have on this? Okay. Dr. Semogerere is not hearing us, but we can hear you. Can I get someone else in the meantime? Let me go to Dr. Magnus Ohman in form of your closing or concluding remark to speak about election campaign financing trends and relevance of campaign finance laws in building sustainable democracy in Africa. What the impact may COVID-19 may have on this. I know you have already spoken about this, but in a kind of closure, what would you share with us?
Well, Charles, I think the final points I'd like to share is just wrapping up a little bit of what has been said so far. Using state resources and the resources of incumbency, which I also think was the comment that the woman was making before it was cut out. I completely agree that law enforcement is incredibly important, but I also think, as was said, civil society and media have an incredibly important role to play here. We must remember that there is not that much evidence that strict regulations actually solve these problems in the longer term. Vote buying happens, abuse of state resources happens because people are responding to it. It can be an effective tool in the short term. If we can remove that as not being an effective approach, it will go away. So we need to consider also the demand and the supply side of politics. I want to briefly agree the issue of candidate selection within parties before the election is incredibly important. I talked to a lot of MPs in Kenya and politicians who all said that they spend more money on being made the candidate of the party than they spent on the campaign. And we must then remember that very, very few countries in the world have regulations and even less oversight of money in the candidate selection process. And the last point I would make, I completely understand that it was not possible for technical reasons to have women on the panel today. That's completely understandable. We do need to have a clear gender perspective on the issue of political finance because it does have a very significant difference on the role of women and men and the opportunities, especially for women, to participate equally in politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Magnus Ohman. Can I have Dr. Patrick Ukase, also your concluding remarks, and if you could speak, mitigating the corrosive effect of money on electoral outcomes in Nigeria, but broaden it to speak to the African continent's perspective and the impact of COVID-19.
Well, thank you very much. We've been able to look at all the issues and a number of recommendations made. But I think that it's important that we started talking about this thing. One area that even researchers have not dwelt so much about is on tracking campaign and election funding in Africa. Also, we've not been able to talk so much about the commercialization and monetization of our politics. I'm glad that we are doing that today, and I expect that we'll continue to put this thing on the front burner. But like I said, there is need for us to continue to conscientize our people. There are a number of groups that can keep doing this conscientization. One, I keep emphasizing the role of civil society organizations. I continue to emphasize the role of the press in mitigating the corrosive effect of money in politics. Civil society organizations, church, religious bodies, and so on and so forth, must continue to enlighten their people as to the effect of, allowing money to influence the political process. As this group do these things, it is also important that, election management body, not election management body here, observers. Quite often we have election observers coming to monitor elections, observe elections. They need to make their findings on this issue very, very pertinent. Even as they make their findings on these issues pertinent, it is important for them to quite often, the issue when they come to monitor elections, what they talk about mostly is the activity at polling units on the day of the elections and so on and so forth. It is important for them to also track before the elections what happened, how did political parties raise their money, how did they spend their money. If election monitoring groups can also assist in doing this, it is going to go a long way in mitigating the corrosive effect of money. But like I said, COVID has actually redefined the way we are behaving, the way we are doing things, and the way we are organizing ourselves. But for elections in Africa and in Nigeria, I do not see COVID helping to change the narrative. Rather, the politicians will continue in their old culture and tradition of ensuring that they buy elections, they purchase elections, they influence voter behavior for their own selfish and personal advertising. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Patrick Ukase. Can I have Dr. Businje Kabumba? Proposals, practical proposals on remedies for taming the excessive use of money in electoral processes in Uganda. Do I have Dr. Businje Kabumba? Okay. Dr. Semogere, do I have you finally? You are not hearing us, but we were able to hear you previously. So if you could make your concluding remarks on this topic that we've been discussing, but specifically link it to COVID-19. Yes.
I start where I started before.
Yes.
It is extremely important that we revisit the constitutional and legal framework to ensure that democracy under multi-party dispensation is to be embraced wholeheartedly by all institutions in the government, including the military, the intelligence, let alone parliament, the judiciary, and the incumbents in office. Then, when we've done that, ensure that the body or the authority which oversees, which controls the funding, is totally independent, and its integrity is beyond the question. We have to learn from other countries which have done this very well. And in Africa, I think Ghana is a case in point. South Africa is another. And outside Africa, we look at Sweden, for instance, and other countries which have taken the trouble to insulate the management and of elections, the overseeing how financial engagements are carried out, where the money is sourced from, when they can also enforce limitations on the part of the incumbents on the extent of financial donations they give out directly and indirectly. Then we have to make sure that the parties themselves are they are insulated from external infiltration, because beginning with the failure to embrace multipartyism, it's been a problem in this country, and I'm sure in many African countries, for leaders in government to infiltrate political parties in opposition by giving money quietly, not openly, and that money is not investigated. I think those are some of the areas which we've got to look at.
Kawanga Temogerere. Can I have Dr. Businje Kabumba?
Oh, maybe, sorry.
I'm afraid.
The electoral system should be changed from winner takes all to proportional representation.
Thank you very much. I think that you make a very important point there, and you've been emphasizing that. Dr. Businje Kabumba, your concluding remarks on this, and it proposed in summary form some practical remedies for taming use of excessive money in electoral processes in Uganda, looking at our context.
Okay. First of all, my very interesting internet is brought to you by MTN Uganda. Everywhere you go, that is at MTN's door. Now, two quick points. Number one is one of the excluded groups that hasn't been mentioned yet is the youth. The increase in nomination fees has a disproportionate impact on the youth who are trying to join politics, because I mean, you know, usually they are starting out in life, and so that is an important point to have in mind. And at the same time, very cynically, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, the cabinet passed a resolution to increase, to provide for 5 representatives of the elderly, and I think one commentator said 70% of parliament anyway consists of older persons. So there seems to be an attack on younger persons in Uganda, which should be looked into. But in terms of moving forward, Charles, what is broken with electoral financing in Uganda is what is broken with Uganda itself. The structural, the historical tensions, the historical illegitimacies of the state then reflect themselves in patronage systems, in the use of vote buying, etc. So I think it's a question of first principles, and to solve this question as to solve so many others, it's a question of first principles. Very practically, for instance, if you compare the accountability, the very high rate of accountability when it came.
Oh, we're being betrayed by your
contributions towards the for COVID funds with the central government. By MTN Uganda.
Yes.
So I think finally.
No, I think that has failed, Dr. Businje Kabumba. Those are the challenges that we have. There are many areas that activists need to focus on, including this quality of internet, because we're told we are operating on 4G. We're actually not sure that we're actually operating. In actual fact, we might be operating 2G. Okay. Henry, we're pretty short of time. Dr. Businje Kabumba, I apologize to you on behalf of NTV and ACFIM, and of course on behalf of MTN Uganda for these mishaps. But Henry Muguzi, if you could wrap this up for us. This is a discussion, this is an area you've been interested in as ACFIM since you were established.
Yes.
Where we are going into another election in 2019, in 2020 rather, 2021, sorry. We are now in 2020. 2021, we are already along the journey. We are only looking at the destination, which is supposed to be between January 8th and February. Yes, and February. Could you wrap this up for us? Where do we stand on the question of money in politics, and specifically the question of the impact and implication of COVID-19?
I think one of the things we have achieved now is to make this an issue of public concern. Because today, if you are to rate the top 5 issues of concern for electoral democracy in Uganda, you'll find this issue. And particularly, quite a number of citizenry and political actors have come to realize that commercialization of politics is actually a problem for our democracy. You have had the president personally coming out to speak about it. That we have. What we haven't done, I think, is to make sure that we get those institutions that are mandated to do this, to do their work. For example, we talk about the Electoral Commission, and repeatedly so, when they get to narrowly interpret their mandate to mean only organizing and conducting elections. The other role that speaks to being the de facto political finance regulator does seem to be ignored, which is why today you will not find it easy if you went to access money, access information about the audit reports and other, submissions that have been made by political parties from 2015, 16, 17 to date, in order for you to be able to adduce scientifically about what were the sources of funding, the funding we saw that was unprecedented in 2016. Okay, I think the time has come also to rethink whether the Electoral Commission can continue to carry on both roles. The role of an electoral management body and also the role of a political finance regulator. I think we need to rethink that.
Thank you very much, Henry Muguzi from Maxim. I need to start with these Zoom participants that we had hoped would get on. So Emmanuel Kitamike, thank you for your contribution. Fiona Nyamutoro, wasn't able to get to you. Fortunate Niwasa Asra, thank you for your contribution, though we got cut off by the interesting internet connectivity. Elijah Cheptoek, I hope you're following. This discussion should continue on the social media, on the other social media platforms that we have, especially on Twitter. The Twitter handle is still available, so the debate can continue until we have the next discussion. Raphael Ojakol and John Meheise, I hope you're following, and your contribution can be captured on the social media platforms. I'd like to ask all of us, and thank in a very special way, Dr. Businje Kawumba of Makerere University School of Law for your contributions in this discussion. Dr. Magnus Ohman, Director at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, IFES, at the regional office in Prague, the Czech Republic. Dr. Patrick Wukase from Kogi State University in Nigeria, Anyimba. Very nice to have had you in this e-symposium, and especially not saving, I think saving the best for last. Dr. Paul Kawanga Semogerere, thank you very much, not just for your contribution to this discussion, but also for your contribution to the politics of this country and its governance questions over the very many years. We really appreciate. From me, I'd like to say thank you to the production crew that has delivered this discussion to you, and especially the guys who provided us the live link from Dr. Semogerere's house to be able to have this e-symposium. The debate on our journey towards the 2021 elections in these interesting times of COVID-19 will continue right here at NTV, and on the other where we get partners like ACFIM to have and raise these discussions, but also encourage you to continue with the debate. From me, Charles Mungu Shampagi, it is a nice Sunday evening, and wish you a very good week ahead.
NTV, turning on your world.